Knock knees or a knee valgus is a very common issue, ranging from a whole host of different problems in the body. However, there are common threads as to why a knee valgus exists and why it happens in the first place. So in today's video, not only are we going to look at the mechanisms behind a knee valgus, but we are also going to go over a few different techniques that you can employ to combat it. Knock knees are typically attributable to a lack of proper tension and stability in two planes of motion. These two planes of motion are the frontal plane, which you can simply view as our side to side, and the sagittal plane, which is simply our back and forth. When it comes to addressing knock knees, it's typically a lack of stability in this side to side plane and a lack of tension in this back and forth plane. So what we're going to try to do today is go over a series of exercises that is going to employ these proper tensions in your body and hopefully provide the programming for your body to operate from. If this is executed well and on a routine basis, then we're eventually going to start to change the software from which our body operates from, which over time is going to limit the effect that knock knees is going to have on our structure. For our first technique, you're going to have to grab either a tennis ball or a lacrosse ball. And what we're going to start to do is dig into the tissues that are just on the lateral quad proximal to our knee. So what I would suggest is starting with your fingers here first, just so you can get a rough idea as to where this point of tension is and the area that you are primarily going to be working through. You may notice that even with some soft tissue release with your thumbs, that area is quite sensitive. And the reason for this is when our knee is constantly in this valgus or slightly internally rotated state, the IT band and the muscle on our lateral quad here starts to almost begin to congeal together. And that tension is going to start to fixate our knee and that more internally rotated state. So once you get an idea for where that point of tension is on the leg, what you're gonna do is simply come down onto your side with your tool of choice, and you're just going to gently start to apply pressure in there. What I would recommend you do here is hang out there for about 90 seconds to 2 minutes, and just allow that tissue to begin to relax. Once the tissue actually starts to loosen up a little bit, then you can start to do very small rolls, just kind of going back and forth against the grain of the tissue. In total, you're gonna spend anywhere between about 3 to 5 minutes, and then you're gonna go over to the other side here as well. Even if you notice, we'll say on the right side, that you deal with more of this valgus tendency, I'm going to encourage you to work on both sides for ideally the same amount of time. Now that we have broken up some of that dense tissue around the knee, we're going to start to move into a little bit more of a corrective exercise where we're going to get into a loaded lunge, and then we're going to start to incorporate a step forward. So for this exercise, we're going to come to our split stance position, and we are going to slowly drop down into about a half lunge. And really try to be mindful of the tendency of that valgus knee that it is that you're trying to address here. You may notice that when you start to drop down into the lunge, that knee already starts to want to go into that more internally rotated state. So what you're gonna have to do here is gently just fight the resistance of the tendency of the knee to want to do that. And ideally, we're gonna try to harmonize 3 points of tension here. The lateral quad is going to be one of them, the hamstring, especially the lateral hamstring, and then ideally up into our glute max here as well. Once we have those 3 points of tension connected, what we're going to try to do is utilize that to take us through a range of motion. And this range of motion is simply just going to be a step forward. And on the leg that I'm stepping forward with or landing on, what I want you to also notice is, does that knee have a tendency to go into that more internally rotated state as well? Because what you might notice is that you can actively load the lunge side well, but then when you go to meet the opposing leg, there isn't proper stability on that side, which causes that knee to go back into a valgus. So what I would suggest you do here is take your time going both ways through this, both through the loading phase as well as on the receiving phase of this. As you start to dial in the coordination and you get a little bit more comfortable with the exercise, you can start to go through this a little bit more quickly. And that way you're going to start to test the stability of the knees, as well as the ankles and the hips, and kind of the weight distribution transfer from one side to the other. For our next exercise, we're going to take principles of the lunge that we were working on previously, and we're going to start to apply that to a single leg standing position. Our focus here is going to be to create some single leg stability. So where you might have felt that you were kind of lacking on the impact or the landing on that previous exercise, we're really going to start to implement some stability into that specific motion. So quite simply, all we're going to do here is come up onto one leg, and I'm going to create a little bit of a shin angle on one side. So I'm going to be looking at the relationship between where my hip, my knee, and my ankle is. And ideally, that is going to be one straight line all the way down with a very subtle angle between my knee and ankle. Once we have established this position, we're going to focus a lot on integrity into the ground, or our ground tension, and making sure that we have almost like a tripod of the foot planted into the ground. If you've never heard of the tripod of the foot, you can think of it almost as like a triangle between your big toe, your pinky toe, and then down kind of to the midfoot. And there's this imaginary triangle of pressure that we're trying to put our focused intention into. So now that we got the shin angle as well as the tripod of the foot intact, what we're going to start to do is challenge these different points of stability. So what I'm going to start to do here is incorporate a very subtle rotation of my upper body. And what this is going to do is certainly challenge the stability of my standing leg, but it's also going to start to build linkages between these points of stability with my upper body as well. If you've been around this channel at all, then you know that we're not just looking at joints in isolation. We're looking at a particular joint, but more or less how does that relate to other joints and muscles in my body? And how can I create different points of tension to help to support different areas of my body? So in this case, we are starting to use things like our obliques, our pecs, even our lats in the upper body here to create stability all the way downstream into the knee. What I would recommend here is spending about 30 to 45 seconds on each side, and you can work through this for a total of 2 to 3 sets. For our last exercise, we're going to work through a low lateral side step. So what we're going to be doing here is taking the principles of the lunge as well as the single leg stability that we were working on the previous exercise, and we're going to start to work in that side to side or frontal plane. So what I would suggest here is getting down quite low, back into that half lunge position. And what I'm going to do is simply just take a side step and load kind of those 3 muscle groups back up again. That lateral quad, that lateral hamstring, and my glute. Now once I catch that tension, I'm going to think about pushing the floor kind of gently to the side and then staying low as I come back to my starting position. To start with, just simply get used to the coordination and tension that is involved in this movement. Sometimes when I'm going through a new exercise, what I like to do is almost count out like a beat to it. So when my foot lands, that would be 1, and then when my other foot lands, that would be 2. So simply what I'm doing here is just a 1, 2, I come back over, 1, 2. Now as your body begins to adapt to that and you kind of get the coordination down, what we're going to do is amp this up a little bit, and we're going to start to only work a single leg as we go from side to side through this. So as you can see here, my center of gravity isn't changing all that much. I'm not standing up a whole lot as I go through this. I'm really trying to focus on pushing through that frontal plane. And then as I land, I'm just kind of absorbing or receiving that momentum on the one leg, and then using that to propel myself back the other way. What I would suggest here is going through it for time. So just like our previous exercise, I would spend about 30 to 45 seconds on this exercise as well, and work through it for about 2 to 3 sets. So when it comes to addressing knock knees, it's important that we look at 3 different pillars. First off, we have to look at where tension already is in the body, and where that tension is kind of being distributed that is putting the knee joint in that valgus position. Secondly, I like to look at the function of the knee in a static position. So if I'm just standing there, say through our single leg exercise that we were going through today, where does the tension go and how is that distributed in a static position if I'm just standing on one leg? And lastly, and probably most importantly, if we really wish to address knock knees or a knee valgus, we have to look at how the knee is functioning dynamically. Because it's one thing for me to hold a isometric position or release tension around my knee, but it's another thing for me to actually change the tension that is being utilized through my leg as I move through a range of motion. So if you wish to truly address and fix your knock knees, then it's important that you bring awareness into this on a day-to-day basis. I think an important thing to keep in mind is the more conscious awareness you bring into something, the more unconscious it's ultimately going to become over time. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to throw it a like, as well as subscribe to the channel for more future content similar to this. It's really where we cover everything around optimizing not only the body, but also the mind, as well as different things in our lifestyle and different kind of lifestyle habits and hacks that we can utilize to really just live a life of efficiency. So if that's something you're into, then I hope to see you around in future videos. And as always, make sure you are prioritizing and then you are optimizing for you. I will catch you in the next one. Peace.